Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Youth Career Mentorship session. We hope that this series has helped you understand how our talents and passions can be directed to the service of our communities, what principles should guide our work in order for this purpose to be fulfilled, how our work can build unity across cultures and peoples, and how work done in the spirit of service to others can unlock human capacity and release our creative powers. The presenters in this series have achieved excellence in their field of work and have applied their knowledge and expertise to address different types of social injustices and to advance inclusion and equity at the local and global levels. Tonight, we are honored to have with us Dr. Todd Khozein. Dr. Khozein is co-CEO at Second News. For the last 20 years, he has been involved in the study and application of systems theory, in particular as it applies to economic development, beginning with the use of biological systems as models for cashew farming cooperatives in Honduras. He went on to develop and build businesses in multiple industries. For the past 10 years, since co-founding Second News, he has accelerated over 300 impact businesses, raising over 500 million and generating over 13 billion in market value. At the center of this work is the development of economies that create social and environmental justice. Dr. Khozein is proud to serve on the board of directors of TechSoup Global, a leader in capacity building for civil society worldwide, and Circulate Initiative, whose mission is to end ocean plastic waste. Second Muse is an impact and innovation company that builds resilient economies by supporting entrepreneurs and the ecosystems around them. They do this by designing, developing, and implementing a mix of innovation programming. From Singapore to San Francisco, Second Muse programs define inspiring visions, build lasting businesses, and unite people across the globe. Over the last decade, they've designed and implemented programs on all continents with 600 plus organizations such as NASA, the World Bank, and Nike. As Mr. Khozein goes through his presentation, I encourage you to type your questions in the question and answer box on the bottom of your screen. We'll go through some of these questions in the second half of our session. Todd, thank you so much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me, Martha. I understand that those of you that are sort of attending this webinar are largely either high school or sort of college students, so that you're thinking both about what kind of a vocation or a career that you want to be having, but also thinking about social justice. And in particular, the how you could sort of bring the two together, how you can have a career that is contributing to a more just world. So I definitely encourage you, sort of as I'm starting to speak, just to put a little bit about your story either in the questions or in the chat box, and specifically what question you're asking yourself and what question you're struggling with, and I'll try to incorporate that in some of my early thoughts. I also understand that there's people that are joining from multiple different countries, and that some of you English may be your second language or maybe your third language. So if there's anything that I say that you'd like me to repeat or explain in a different way, please don't be shy. At the end of the day, my hope is that I'm useful to you. So before I talk a little bit about what I do and kind of a little bit of my path, I want to just stay for a minute on the question that you all are asking yourselves, which is how do I incorporate social justice into my daily work, and just want to emphasize how important that is. I think it's foundational for our lives. And I think that it's a question that I hope you get really good at, because I hope it's a question that you ask yourselves forever. Because as soon as you have an interesting answer to figure out, okay, this is what social justice means, and I think this is how I can contribute to justice, Your action that will follow that will inevitably lead to a higher understanding and more elevated understanding of what social justice means in your vocational path. And so I hope that this is something that we continuously ask ourselves, and that you continuously ask ourselves, both at home as well as both individually as well as sort of with your family and friends. And I think that in part this is because of human nature and the nature of social justice. You know, as humans, we're designed for speed and not accuracy. You know, when if you think about the modern Homo sapiens were roaming around the African continent about 200,000 years or so ago. And if you think back, to them, and you think back, imagine yourself being one of those early Homo sapiens, and you see a bear running at you. You probably didn't ask yourself, I wonder what the bear's intentions are. I wonder if the bear is coming to play. I wonder if the bear, just wants a friend. Some early Homo sapiens surely asked that question, and I can assure you that we are not their descendants. We are the descendants of the judgmental ones that saw something and ran up a tree. And in many ways, we see that in our daily behavior, right? We misinterpret each other all the time. Our brains are designed to take in immense amounts of information, and most of it gets sorted and filtered by our brains by our subconscious brains, even before we have a chance to think about it. And this is why we have bias. We are hopelessly biased as individual humans. And so as you start thinking about a career that is related to the development of something as complex as social justice, and as you're trying to think about the relationship between social justice and pandemics, and poverty and racism, gender inequality, climate change, it is going to be impossible for you to actually understand, let alone solve any of these major issues independently, which really speaks to how much we need each other. Our genius and our insights as it relates to social justice, as it relates to understanding how to create a better world. We are dependent on each other as we are on our mothers when we're little babes, because we simply cannot see all angles. And the only way that we can see all angles is with ourselves. And so really coming at this question from, a consciousness of the oneness of humanity, recognizing that we need all of our different angles, is the only way I think that we're going to even start to understand what social justice is. Because what is social justice? I mean, do we see any country in the world that is truly just? Any political system, any system of economics, any system of any home that is truly socially just? I mean, it's an evolving question, and we're only going to develop it more and more as we go on. And if you think of the origins of our big social systems, when you think about chemistry or biology, our teachers tell us, well, this is the father of chemistry, this is the father of economics, this is the founder of this. So even our fields were not born from collective discourse and dialogue where everybody was inputting. They were largely founded on the ideas of solitary geniuses, very, very intelligent, brilliant people with enormous biases and flaws, because we all have them. And so these systems that were designed to serve all were born from the few. So it's not a surprise that a design of the few does not serve the all. And so I think the last thought, just before I share a little bit about sort of what I do, is this idea that as you're thinking about social justice, don't limit that thinking to social justice-y fields. But there's certain fields that ooze social justice, right? Like a social worker or something like this. And I think that these fields are amazing. But the reality is that our political system does not have social justice in it. Our system of corrections, criminality and prisoners does not have justice in it. Our schools, and our systems of education do not. So all of these major fields that in aggregate form human civilization were all born with crazy ideas. They were all born with, let's not forget that in Switzerland, women only voted in this 1970s. Let's not forget that in the country that I am speaking to you from, in the US, certain states were practicing legal segregation against African Americans in the 1970s. I mean, this is, let's not forget that the systems that we all exist in right now are quite oppressive to a large number of humans. And the ideas behind these systems were that certain humans are inherently superior to other humans. And so as you're thinking about social justice, don't put artificial limitations on how your career and how your passions and how your unique vocation and how your unique calling can contribute to social justice. Because I can probably give you an argument for every field on the planet, how it can actually be rethought and be rethought to sort of incorporate social justice. So I would say, I can't emphasize how important it is to ask yourself the question. And this question that you're asking yourself right now is one that I really hope you ask for the rest of your lives. I certainly do. Every question I'm saying, is my career doing enough as it can sort of in social justice? So the broad areas that I work in sort of with Second Muse is around broadly the field of economics. So the work that we do at Second Muse, we build economies. We contribute to the development of economies, and we do this at the point at which we believe economies are most influenceable. And this is kind of, people might not think of economic development as a social justice-y type of a field, but what we do is that we try to influence economies at the point that they're most influenceable. So if you want to influence, a human, do you influence a human that's younger or influence a human that's older? We're all more influenceable when we're younger than when we're older. If you want to influence the direction of a tree, do you influence it when it's young and a sapling, or do you influence it when it's big and has a huge trunk? It's very clearly that the earlier something is influenced in its developmental progress, the more it is influenceable. And so what we do is that we look for economies that are young, either because it's a new technology or it's a new industry within a city or within a country, or because it never was an economy, it was a problem and we're trying to solve it. And that's kind of the work that we do, specifically with the lens of social justice and environmental justice. So even fields that are very privileged, meaning you have to be from a class that holds power in order for you to even be in the field. We see that if you come in early and in the right moment, you can influence it. And I'll give you a couple of examples of exactly what it is that we do. Sort of as it goes. There's three broad areas of the type of work that we do, and I'll give you a couple examples of real work that we do to give you a sort of more grounded sense in terms of what we do. We support a lot of entrepreneurs, people that are building new businesses, but also the ecosystems that surround those entrepreneurs. So the first level at which we do work is something that we call open innovation. And open innovation, many of you may be familiar with it. We used to think that the person that is the expert and has studied a problem all of their life needs to be the one that interprets all the data and needs to be the same person that's actually going to provide a solution to that problem. What we've really learned, especially over the last decade, is that sometimes the people that are smartest about a problem, the absolute experts, aren't always the best people to solve the problem. But they're incredible at providing context. And so some of the work that we do is that we engage lots of people, very wide and big communities all over the world, to contribute to solving a particular problem. We are just about to launch one this weekend, actually, with NASA, which is the U.S. Space Agency, specifically looking to try to understand the COVID-19 virus a little bit better. And this is through a program that we have called the Space Apps. It's called the International Space Apps Challenge. And what we do is that we work with 240 communities in a little over 80 different countries. And these are programmers and, manufacturers of hardware and designers that will come together in communities in their different cities and will get data that is generated from NASA, and they have like hackathons. And so it's a big hackathon, and people will come up with solutions, and they will build programs and software and algorithms that are trying to solve problems using data from NASA. And so some of these will turn into businesses, some of them won't. Some of them NASA uses, some of them they don't. And so this is an example of how we're trying to say, I grew up in Ecuador, and we used to visit a small city, maybe big village, small city called Otavalo. It's a largely Quechua city inside Ecuador. And a few years back, we received a letter. Sometimes we receive letters from participants. We received a letter from a 12-year-old Quechua girl who said, I can imagine having a career in data science. This is the first time that I feel like I'm a part of the world. And so this idea of, how do we incorporate a wider spectrum of people to participate in our economies? That's going to help, that's going to help the development of our economy to represent sort of more justice. Sometimes what we do is that we help entrepreneurs, like people that are actually actively building businesses. We've been working with the city of New York for about 6 years or so to build an economy focused on advanced manufacturing. So these are entrepreneurs that are building physical products, building, new ways to build chairs, new ways to build robots, building drones, building machines, manufacturing these kinds of things. And it's a very difficult thing to do to start a new business. It's also a very highly privileged field. There's no field that screams young white male PhD rich daddy more than advanced manufacturing. Of the 80 or so entrepreneurs that we helped take to market last year, 55% of them were women or underrepresented minorities. And so one of the things that we've shown through our work is that you can change the culture and the composition of the participants in an economy in a pretty short period of time. And it's really interesting. So this idea that, change has to take forever and equality needs to take forever. The data that we're getting from our program says otherwise. You can actually create substantial change in both the culture and in the composition of participants in an economy in a pretty short period of time. And so this is, we take about a couple hundred or so entrepreneurs to market every year in programs, programs around the world. The last sort of broad body of work that we do is, is around, focusing on supporting, not just the entrepreneurs, but the ecosystems that are surrounding them. And so this is when we're really thinking about how do you help cities have better policies that allow for new economies? How do you actually, how do you, engage more investments dollars? How do you, how is money spent sort of, invested? I mean, there's a very embarrassing statistic in venture capital is basically a pool of capital, so money that is used to invest in particular businesses, right? So I'm going to give you this money so that you can build your business, and you give me a percentage of your business. This is a field called venture capital that many of you may be familiar with. In the United States, only 2% of venture capital actually goes to women, and 0.0002% goes to women of color. I mean, it's a miserably embarrassing figure that such a small percentage of this money goes to sort of women and people of color. So there you see an injustice in how funding is deployed. And so one of the things that we try to do is dramatically shift how money is flowing into entrepreneurs that are starting businesses. To specifically to encourage a more just composition. And our argument is not just because it's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. But that's not our argument. Our argument is it's not just because we should be gooder. Our argument is that we should be better. If we're going to be more intelligent, how many people in the world, of our 8 billion humans, how many people are actively contributing to the advancement of civilization? How many of our 8 billion humans are actively, contributing, aligned with their passion, aligned with their calling, bringing their true genius to the table? Most people are malnourished. I mean, this is not, so this question around, um, this question around how are we going to build economies that are going to adapt to violent climate, right? We're in a phase of human structures and civilizations where we've never seen climate this aggressive, and it's only going to get worse. We have watched with the COVID, we have watched entire markets be disrupted and entire economies, almost evaporate, supply chains evaporate. So there's a question that we have to ask around, the world is influenceable right now. How are we going to influence it so that we can actually build more intelligent economies, build more intelligent education systems, build more intelligent this? And so our focus is on more intelligent economies. And one of our arguments is, if more people are participating and benefiting when the economy is doing well, then more people are going to be participating and invested to help the economy rebound in many different ways. And so this gives us an opportunity to rethink. We're in an incredible moment of human civilization where we're running out of gas in the systems that were designed 100 years ago and 200 years ago and 300 years ago. And we're really ready to start building some new things. And we're watching, in the last 10, 20 years, we're watching how empires are falling, and how something as small as a virus can really take down certain systems that we thought was a good idea, but it turns out maybe they weren't. So I think maybe I'll stop there right now, Martha, just for a moment, and see maybe if there's some questions, and we can.
So friends, again, I encourage you to type your questions in the Q&A box that you have at the bottom of your screen, or you can also go to the chat box and type it there. First question is about this New York City initiative. Is it open to the public? I'm spending some time in New York and would love to see it there as soon as it's safe to go, of course.
Yeah, I mean, New York it was the center of the global pandemic. So it was stay safe, Lavinia. Yeah, absolutely. The program is called FutureWorks, and we've been doing it in partnership with the Economic Development Corporation of New York. And so if you look up FutureWorks in New York, you can look at it. We also have another program in New York called MCORE, Manufacturing Core, MCORPS. And this is focused on helping entrepreneurs that are trying to manufacture and create products, and how to take those products and how to go to market. One of the things that I'll also share a little bit is I guess I didn't really share much about my individual path. Are there? Would you like me to share something about that, Martha? Or
yes, please.
So, actually, let me ask Nikita's question. So, Nikita, does your practice with young economies involve the diversification of mono economies, and what would that involve? Have you worked on any implementations that have brought third world countries to developing country status? Yeah, I think that's an incredible question, Nikita. And I think that what she's talking about is, diversity is a reality that represents strength. This is not a social idea or construct. This is hard science, right? So if you think about natural ecosystems, for example, why is climate change so dangerous to human life? It's because climate change, when the world gets hotter, we're going to lose all kinds of other kinds of life. And life in this world is all interconnected, in mostly in ways that we don't know. In some ways that we know, but mostly in ways that we don't know. So, we probably know about the relationship between bees and about pollination, for example. We hear lots about that. And so with bees' die, it's a big problem because then, plants don't pollinate and it affects food, sort of in many ways. And so this idea of diversifying economies, so one economy that only does one thing, say that your entire, there was a very famous case study where Ireland made one kind of potato, and there was a similar problem with in Costa Rica with bananas, for example, where you only make one crop, and then you have a virus or some kind of a pathogen that infects your parasite or something that infects your crop, and all of a sudden you starve because you put all of your eggs in one basket. And so it's very problematic. We're seeing this with COVID, right? Everybody is seeing the problem where we don't have personal protective equipment, where we don't have enough masks or enough gowns or enough. Why? Because all of it were being made in the same factories, and those factories are now serving another part of the world. And so hospitals are like, what do I do? Because I put all of my sort of eggs in one basket. And so mono economies are fragile. It may look big and strong when the going is good, but the truth is that they're very fragile. And so we're seeing COVID expose the fragility, of very much our global supply chains and our global economies. And so we very much do, Nikita. I mean, mostly what we do is we support entrepreneurs. So an example of actually the work that I mentioned in New York was actually specifically about the diversification of the New York economy. So, 6 or so years ago, there wasn't very much of an advanced manufacturing sector, in New York. And so one of the things that we did was specifically working to diversify their economy by creating a new economy. And actually, that's the most exciting for us, because when we're creating a new economy or building a new economy, in a sense, we get to influence the culture and the composition. We're doing some work around gender equity in higher tech. But we're not focusing on Silicon Valley, because, as important as that is, that train has kind of left the station. The more established and entrenched an economy is, the more difficult it is to influence. Sort of to my previous sort of point. And so, I think the vast majority of our work involves the diversification sort of economies, just because we tend not to work with really, really well established industries, at least not in places where they're well established. Our work is in North America and in Southeast Asia. Specifically in Southeast Asia, we're doing a lot of work right now with ocean plastic. Ocean plastics is a tremendous problem. There's about 150 million metric tons of plastic in the ocean, and it's very problematic. We've all seen pictures of animals losing their kind of precious lives in packaging. But the problem goes even deeper than that, because plastic doesn't go away when it degrades. It turns into microplastic, and microplastic also enters the fish and also enters the humans in the fish. And so plastic in the ocean is a big problem. We're putting about 8 million metric tons of plastic into the ocean every year. And so much of this plastic is coming from countries whose population growth and GDP growth have gone up much faster than the ability for them to build waste management infrastructure. And so that has tended to kind of be problematic. It's also very problematic because the West tends to export plastic garbage. And when China said we're stopping taking it, and it landed on a lot of these countries, they already had struggling waste management infrastructures. And so this is an example of some of the work that we're doing in the developing world to help spur and invest in sort of some of these economies.
Todd, a personal question. When you go, when you travel a lot and you are working with, with the new economies, nascent economies all over the world, how do you, and your concern is to diversify those who are participating in building these economies, but you grew up in Ecuador, so you have an understanding of this oppressor-oppressed mentality. And if people, see themselves as less than, and they have internalized this idea that, the US is better and people or their economy is the model and is the ideal. So we have this idea development, of the modern development, as the goal that we want to follow all over the world, right? Like what we say about the colonization of the mind.
Yeah.
How do you, is there any, and you, I'm sure you want to avoid that, right? So
Yeah.
how do you approach this cultural diversity and the ethnic diversity so that people feel empowered, not only that uh, the working place, that these economies are diversified in terms of representation, but that they also feel that they have an equal voice, and that they feel that, yes, I, what I have to say is as important as what anyone else has to say this, in this corporation, in this organization, and so that they actively engage in this global dialogue, in this global exchange of ideas,
Yeah.
instead of just being recipients of it. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's more important, honestly. I mean, like, I mean, I think that if you think, and I apologize for using some examples from the United States. These are the examples that I'm definitely closest to, and there's other examples that I can share as well. But I mean, if you saw in the last, election, that we had in this country, there was the whole fiasco around the company called Cambridge Analytica that was using Facebook and like information that we were getting on social media to influence votes in one way or the other. And this is in the same way that I feel like Cambridge Analytica exposed the fragility of the American democratic process. I feel in many ways COVID is actually exposing the fragility of the U.S.'s economic model. I mean, certain things appear strong until they don't. A tree seems really strong, but you don't quite know when it's rotting from the inside until it falls over. I'm not. So, and let me just give you an example of how if you think about, one of the ways. Now, I think that we're going to see a lot 6 months out when we've looked back on this. Right now, we are seeing a randomized control trial of every governance system on the planet of how it deals with COVID. And we're going to come on the backside and we're going to say, ooh, this country did really well. This country did really badly. This country. And I think that we're going to learn a lot about what the future of humanity should look like in the presence of pandemics. What systems, what strategies and systems work best? Which countries came to the best decisions? How did they come to the best decisions? Which cities came to the best decisions? When you think about the American economic model, in the American, and which has largely been exported throughout the world, right? I mean, the colonization of the mind that you're talking about, when we talk about this very capitalistic, sort of model of economic development that the West has promoted, and for good reasons, right? There's a lot of technological progress that has kind of come over there. But when you think about this system has optimized certain things at the expense of other things. So the way that you do an economy is any social system, you optimize. What are we focusing on? What's most important? What's least important? And what we have focused on is the maximization of profits, short-term profits. That has been the absolute maximize. So why is it that hospitals did not have, why do we have such, from the American system, why are in hospitals such a crisis? I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you can think about it as a system, right? We have a privatized healthcare system, which means we have 1 million hospital beds, less than 1 million hospital beds for 300 million humans. That's a system that is designed to keep beds full, right? The more why? Because the private sector is excellent at making things efficient. And so you have a system where you're always going to have your beds filled. You're never going to have any wasted beds. But if a pandemic hit, even in a bad flu season, we put people in parking lots and in tents. And this is worse than the worst flu season that we could have imagined, right? So why are we having a crisis? Well, you got to ask yourselves, well, maybe, we didn't, embed this. Why can't we have masks or personal protective equipment? We don't have any kind of a any kind of a storehouse, any kind of a collective storehouse, emergency storehouse. Why? Because we have no buffer. Um, why does the hospital not able to buy masks? Because the hospital bought it from one distribution company. Why did they not have 3 distribution companies? Because they wanted to get the maximum, the best price from this one. This one works with 1 factory in China. Why? Why don't they work with 10 factories in China? Because they weren't optimizing resilience. They weren't optimizing safety. They were optimizing the best price that we actually get over there. And so I think that this is a moment to say, and this is not even to talk about the fact of an enormous percentage of, what is it? Something like 80% of the American population cannot afford an unforeseen expense of $600, and this is in the richest economy in the world. There's problems with this thing, and they're only going to be exposed by certain offenses or insults that are coming our way. And COVID is one example of sort of those insults. And so I think that in the same way that we think about the diversification of bacteria in our bodies and how important that is, or the diversification of animals in an ecosystem, where if the bees die, lots of other things are going to fall. We need to think about the diversification ideas and models in a world that is rapidly changing in ways that we have no idea how it's going to change. Right? There's, what is the saying that economic forecasting exists to make astrology look respectful? I mean, it is impossible to forecast the world, and what makes it even more impossible to forecast is that we're living in the most aggressive climate change that we know in recorded modern history. And so the worst fire seasons and the worst droughts, and it's creating civil wars like in Syria. And so the effects of all this are going to require us to develop new models, because it could be that at the end of the day, this is the best model. It's more likely that it won't be the best model, and its fragility will be exposed, and we'll have to rethink, well, what does it, and I'm not talking about just in a social justice kind of a way. I'm talking about, lots of businesses are going out of business right now. So maybe what we invested in the last 20 years didn't make sense if we're bankrupt today, And so even just from a healthy economics perspective, we're going to have to think about new models. Now, the other thing that I would say on top of that is that oftentimes I hear people say, how can we be like Silicon Valley? We want to be the Silicon Desert. We want to be the Silicon Selva. We want to be the Silicon something, right? And I would suggest that if you try to be like another model that's out there, at best, you're going to be second best. There is something incredibly special that draws from your cultural heritage, that draws from your skill set, that draws from a reality of the world today. And if that is what you develop, that is actually going to be much more successful than pretending to be something that you're actually not. And so I think that this is a tragic moment that we're in right now. It is a tragic moment because of the sheer loss of human life. This is a tragic moment because existing tragedies inside societies are being even exposed more highly. We're seeing this, for example, with racism in the United States. It's by far the greatest social issue that this current country faces. But with all the pressure that's coming right now, you're seeing who it hurts, and it's not even who it's getting hurt. And who's sort of being successful. And so I think that there's an urgency to rethink as we're rebuilding the world and as we're rebuilding economies, what are we actually rebuilding?
Thank you, Todd. I want to encourage the friends again to type in your questions in the question and answer box and in the chat box. Todd, well, we have another question. In thinking of climate, are you seeing a rise in interest towards diversifying energy economies? Can you see that, Todd, too?
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, I'll read it out loud so everyone. So in thinking of climate, are you seeing a rise in interest towards diversifying energy economies, towards renewables and moving away from fossil fuels? How does your organization choose what projects to support?
Um, uh, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, Margie. I mean, every time there's some crisis in the world, we ask, I ask myself this question. I mean, there's no question that we have to move away from oil and gas, right? I mean, there's not to mention, I mean, you know, there's certainly the reality of peak oil, but like, the effects on climate are just something that we're going to have to be, rethinking and moving away from. And there's been a slow march towards it, right? And I think that you're seeing really, we work with an organization called NYSERDA in New York. Actually, the MCORE program that I mentioned is focused specifically on clean tech manufacturing, and so we work really closely with clean technology innovators and businesses, particularly in New York. I think that it's a tricky question. Right now, fossil fuels are so heavily subsidized that it's really hard to compete with incredible subsidies. One of the things that we're seeing, though, is that we're seeing, we're in some conversations with some governments that are doing really interesting things with their rescue packages, right? So, for example, if entire industries are going to be rescued with public dollars. Public dollars come from public funding, which are the tax dollars that we pay. This works in just about every country, sort of in the world. And so, there are some really interesting, forward-thinking, countries that are trying to think about how rescue packages can be linked to greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, I will give this airplane company a big loan and the interest will be at 5% that they have to pay back. But if they can hit certain targets on greenhouse gas emissions, the percentage that they're going to have to pay back in interest will actually go down. So financial incentives to be able to reduce greenhouse gases. This, of course, ties to the market demand for the renewable energy that you were talking about, because the more renewables that we're using, ultimately that's going to have much less of an effect. And so it's a constant march forward in renewables. I don't know when that moment is going to be. I think that right now, as governments are emerging from the panic of what do I do, to hey, how can we actually more intelligently design our fiscal and financial packages to be able to sort of be more representative. I think that's actually what we're seeing. There's some pretty substantial funding as well from a number of countries, including the EU, that are going towards renewable technologies and renewable energy.
Todd, I'm going back to to your career path. Can you briefly recount it, and how did you get to where you are?
Yeah, I mean, it was a fairly non-traditional path. I thought I was going to be a dancer. I thought I was going to be a flamenco dancer. It's what I studied, and it's what I love to do. And I had an injury, and I couldn't do that anymore. Being a dancer, I was at the center of my idea of the world, and I felt like that forced me to have a different point of reference. And so I studied economics in undergraduate, and I had this seminal lecture. There was kind of this portly professor I had. He had a big beard and he had a deep voice. He kind of spoke with the voice of God, with lots of authority and a very deep voice. And there was this in the social sciences, in the same way that if you're going to design a plane, you have to understand the science of aerodynamics, and you have to define the nature of the behavior of the world that you're designing for. In social systems, we also design that behavior, right? So, when we designed our educational system, if you go back far enough, somebody said the mind of a child is a blank slate, and you need older humans to teach younger humans. And that's why our classrooms look like a pulpit with 30 chairs facing the pulpit, because we believe that knowledge comes from one person. Unless you're Maria Montessori, who came up with a very different vision of the human child and what their possibility is, and they were the teacher acts more as an interface between reality and so you look at a classroom, it looks very different. If you think about prisons, we think that people that should be criminals should be removed from society and are going to try to break free, and that's why we put them behind big walls and humans with guns, keeping them inside. If you see any structure, social structure, physical structure, you can always trace it back to an idea you have of the nature of that person that you're designing for. In economics, the famously narrated human is a human by the name of Homo economicus. Literally, it means economic man. And so we were learning about that in this particular class. And my teacher said, man is selfish, man is greedy, man is self-interested, and man wants everything, but there are limited resources in the world, and thus the field of economics. And I remember being so offended. I was like, you jerk, that's not my mother, that's not me, that's not who I aspire to be. But it gave me this insight that, our human, system, our social systems happen by design. We have an idea and a thought, and that thought turns into a theory, and that theory turns into a model, and that model turns into a structure. And we tend to say bad politician, bad policy, bad corporation, bad industry, oil and gas, you're bad. We tend to react at the structural level, but it's the wrong level to react that, because they're only doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like the evil industry is supposed to be making money because that's their job in the system that we designed. And so I was so offended by this idea, but it also came with this understanding that if you can go back and think differently about humans, you can actually design differently in terms of the systems. And so I actually got as I was thinking about this when I was I did my graduate education, I went to medical school. And in medical school, I learned to think about a human body as a system. And so because I had studied economics and because I was in medicine, I couldn't stop thinking about this human body as a model for the world and for the world economic system. And so I did my postdoctorate work in economic modeling that was based on the human body. And so specifically looking at the human body and this physical science. And we have a closer, our relationship to truth with the physical sciences is a little bit closer than the social sciences. Like in the physical sciences, I can say, you remember when we were trying to discover flight, and like we put these funny looking feathers on our arms and we jumped off the cliff. And when the first person, fell and died, it's very hard to call that a success. You have to say, at best, you can call it a failure on the path to success. But you can't spin that in any other way. But we can oppress entire groups of humans for centuries, and we can call it progress, because in social systems, narrative is determined by who has power, and whoever has power writes the story. And so for me, studying a physical system like the human body, and again, you don't think about the study of medicine leading me to building economies. I mean, gosh, if anything, I had, many people, including my own family, talk about how much of an idiot I was to go through 4 years of medical school and not become a doctor. But for me, it was the marriage of the field of medicine as an incredible model to understand when it works and when it doesn't work, and economics, which is the system of how our global commerce is arranged and how we navigate resources, which gave me an idea that I might be able to sort of explore. And it was a difficult path, but I feel that for those of you on the call that are thinking about what career you want to go, don't start from I want to be a doctor, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a dancer, I want to be a this. Think about what you want to create in the world, and what you want to, what is the influence that you want to create in the world, and what is your soul screaming at you to do? Like, you have a passion, there's something that you do and that you've done in life that when you were doing it, it made you feel like it was perfect. And we have to rethink a lot of things, which means the careers as we know them are boxed in ways that is not going to be what the future needs. And so this is a moment of pioneers. And I think we're living in this crazy time where the fragility of all of our systems across human civilization are being exposed, one after another. And don't just look at COVID, look at the last 20 years. look at the Arab Spring, look at, anyways. So my path was quite non-traditional. So that was my path.
Oh, this is so interesting and fascinating, really listening to you. But what advice would you give to a youth that is going to college and that is exploring a career path? Obviously, you are a pioneer because you bring together different fields of knowledge and you're trying to answer some questions probably for yourself. You're looking for certain answers, but what principle should be involved? What advice would you give to somebody who wants to, has a commitment with social justice? You said at the beginning that we should not think that social justice is only attached to one field or to one specific knowledge. But are there other principles that you would recommend the youth pay attention to as they, go into college and select a career?
Yeah, it's a privilege to think about what we want to do for the rest of our lives. So many humans don't get to have that choice. So many humans end up in a path where they have to do something. They have to work on a farm, or they have to, provide for their family when they're 13 or 14, or they just never have an education. And so I think starting from this pace of the recognition of this incredible privilege to have. What is the most common, not just today, but if you think about the last 1,000 years of human civilization, how many people had a choice to say, what do I want to spend the rest of my life doing? And I think that recognizing the incredible power of that moment, allows you to say, the world, if your passion is to change the world, then the thing that you're going to do cannot be born from the world in which that you actually want to change. You cannot come and change the world from the framework of the world. You have to sort of seek beyond that. And so what I would encourage is make yourself incredibly uncomfortable. Talk to people that you otherwise would never speak to. Expose yourself to the breadth of lives that you could actually have. Try to understand not only the depth of the problem that you're going to do, but the depths of your own soul. This is, and humans are different, right? We have archetypes. Some people want, know what they're going to do and what they're going to eat for the next, 3 weeks. And if that's the kind of person that you do, then that's probably the model that you're going to have to sort of go in terms of a very rigorous analysis and study. What I would strongly encourage you to do is that I grew up in a family where my father told me, you're going to be this. Right. And I don't think that my experience is unique. And so we have to ask ourselves, you have a unique genius that is yours and yours alone. Please, for the love of God, give that a voice. Give it a chance. Give that voice inside you a chance to tell you what it wants to be and what it wants to do. Because literally, I firmly believe that the only way that we're going to get out of the suffocating world that we live in for so many humans is by coming at it from people that are willing to completely rethink from the ground up, not just individually, but collectively.
Dear Todd, do you have time for one more question? One last question?
Sure, you're happy.
Going from your career path to more of a global perspective on this. As you watch the world rebuild their economies, do you think they are going to be built in such a fashion that widens current economic divides or that narrows them? What specific measures can be taken by small social movements to narrow these divides and support emerging businesses that can narrow these divides? How's your company continuing to support these efforts as investment funds begin to go underground?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I don't know. I think that we're going to take different paths. I firmly believe that one of the reasons why our economies are so fragile is because of the economic divides. I think there's a principle in systems theory, where a system exists and then you have chaos happen, right? Which is the system, but there's this idea that at its most chaotic, at its most disrupted, that is when a system is the most creative. And so there's this arc that these systems go through in systems theory, where you have stability, and then you have instability and chaos, and then you reach another level of stability. The force that influences the move from chaos to a higher form of stability is often a small force. It doesn't need to be a large force. It can be a gentle push. You know, educators call it the reachable, teachable moment. You know, if you think about your kid, when you want to teach that lesson, I will not, you know, in medicine, we used to, one of the few things that you can do to make somebody's health, you know, truly better is to get them to stop smoking. But nobody will listen to you when you tell them stop smoking, except when they just had a heart attack, or when somebody in their family just had a heart attack, or when they had a problem. And a window opens up. And in that window open up, something can actually influence. And so that influence is the voice of the small social movements that are saying, I can think of a better way to do this. And so I think that if ever there is a time for social movements to shift systems, it is in moments like now, where the failure is just so obvious and the problems are kind of so obvious. That's really the moment. Now, I think that we're going to have a choice, right? We can rebuild, and you know, some of the work that we're doing, we're in conversations with several governors in the United States. We're in conversations with several presidents' offices in different countries, specifically having this conversation around saying, as you rebuild your economy, we suggest that you do this. You know, your economy needs to be more inclusive. You need to create the divide. It's no mystery to most of the people that are you know, influencing and investing in these economies, that ultimately diversity equals strength of an economy. And these are enshrined principles of economics. You don't need to dig very far to understand that. And so and you know, I do know this though. If we don't choose this moment to try to rethink our economic structures to be more just and to be actually more quiet, then we're only delaying another pain that's going to come in another year, or in another 5 years, or in another 10 years that's going to be worse than the one that we're currently facing. And so I think we're in a moment where we are going to have an opportunity to do that, or we're just delaying the pain, which is ultimately going to be a bigger pain.
Thank you so much, Todd, really, for generously sharing with us your time, your knowledge. It was really very enlightening, and I personally enjoyed it very much. I'm sure all the participants did too. And I want to remind the friends that our next session is going to be on Thursday, May 30th. And the director of the ACLU Missouri, Luz Maria Enriquez, is going to talk to us about civil liberties and race. Oh, I'm sorry, this is going to be next Saturday, this coming Saturday. That's May 30th. Thank you very much. And the recording of today's talk is going to be online, hopefully by tomorrow. Have a good night, everyone. Todd, thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.